Diogenes of Sinope, a Socrates gone mad, 412 to 323 BC. So, Diogenes is a Greek philosopher. He is living literally at the same time as Plato. They knew each other. He also knew Socrates, Plato's student. You'll often see him pictured, as you do on the right. He's got a candle, a lantern in his hand. You oftentimes see a dog nearby, and he usually doesn't have a lot of clothing. He's one of the founders. He is the founder of the school of Cynicism. And we'll talk about what cynicism, or what to be a cynic, means. Cynicism, basically it says, denies established conventions. What we look at as being right, it basically said, are these the right things to be doing? The way we live, is this right? He began to doubt things. He began to say, maybe we should turn to our true thoughts and opinions, not just do what is normally done in the past. Established conventions meaning just the historical ways we do things. Who's to say that those things are right? He believed that virtue exists, and we should go out of our way to realize and reject what is unnecessary in our life. Now, what's unnecessary in our life, we could say today, is toxic people. He said having lots of personal, or really any personal possessions, or being popular, which unfortunately those are the very same things that everybody likes in today's society. Of what use is a philosopher who doesn't hurt anybody's feelings? Well, this is an interesting one. From teaching this class, I've learned that kids tend to go through 4 stages. The first stage is they really like the class in the way it's kind of taught, in the way they can think for themselves. And then usually the second stage is a lot of kids hate me, which is amusing because I've hurt their feelings. Now, how have I hurt their feelings? Not intentionally. I've never intentionally tried to hurt anyone. I've tried to expose them to their views, maybe not necessarily being 100% correct. And the thing is, I can do that with everybody's views, including my own. I don't know much. And as Socrates said, I am the smartest because I know nothing. The third step that students usually go through is being bored in class, and then the fourth step is one day everything clicks, light bulb moment, and they become a little more enlightened, if you will. But the hurting of feelings is what Diogenes was doing. He insulted people, and that's why he was a great philosopher. He urinated on people. Well, not a lot, but that made him a great philosopher in the minds of my students last year, who said he was their favorite philosopher. So let's find out why. So the famous School of Athens painting, you see Plato and Aristotle in the doorway arguing, and then you see the guy on the stairs just kind of kicking it. That's Diogenes. He's the crazy philosopher. Eccentric means not really normal, and he was definitely not normal. He went out of his way to be crazy as a way to criticize how fake every aspect of society is. He himself lived as a beggar. He didn't have a job. He was right in the middle of Athens. He made a virtue out of being really poor. In other words, he made fun of people who were rich and taunted them. And we'll get to that in a little bit. He himself actually had a large clay wine barrel that he lived in, often with very little clothes on, in the middle of the city, begging for food, living with the dogs. This man was, generally speaking, the favorite philosopher of almost half of my classes. Here you see Diogenes. He was described as Socrates gone mad. In other words, Socrates, if you remember as well, used the Socratic method as the gadfly to bite people in their backside to make them move intellectually on their opinions. While Diogenes went a little bit farther. Diogenes' beliefs. First, he taught we need to live by a living example. He was not a writer. He was not a philosopher in the sense. His work was the way he lived. He was, sorry for the language, the historical badass of all time. I think why a lot of people like him is he had the bravery or the cojones to not care about how others viewed him. He looked at the property of others, and he looked at the reputation of others, and he rejected them. He didn't think that they meant anything. He went maybe a little bit far in most people's view about what was human decency, but we'll talk about how he differed, how humans act civilized or uncivilized compared to a dog. Socrates, as I said, was the gadfly, except he kind of tried to hurt people's feelings. He used disgust. He was disgusted at the ignorance of others. Socrates was trying to help everybody, or so he said. Diogenes was a little mean-spirited. And his shocking lifestyle and the things he did, he was trying to show how irrational a lot of the things we believe in our society to be. All of the social values and the accepted things that you were taught are the way we do things and we don't even question them. He challenged those things. Here's a statue of Diogenes doing one of his favorite hand gestures, the middle finger. He would reject people who would criticize him in the streets or when he would speak. His ideas of normal, he would eat and sleep in the street. He didn't think he needed a big posh bed. He didn't wear a lot of clothing. He would urinate in public, and more than once people would criticize him, so he would aim his stream at them. He would, in fact, defecate in a theater. The story does go, I believe it was at a speech by Plato. He may have actually popped a squat. That is in dispute, but it is something, if you live in the street, it's something you're going to do in the street. It's not like he could go to his portal potty behind his wine barrel. And he gave people the middle finger enough that obviously somebody actually commissioned a statue with him flipping off Athens. There is only a finger's difference between a wise man and a fool. It's interesting, I used the finger reference slide to slide. I didn't notice that till just now. The wise man and the fool. Now, you can say this Diogenes guy is brilliant, or you could say he's a freaking Looney Tune. And I think if somebody tried to pull Diogenes' stuff today, he would be probably institutionalized. But there is a thin line between a wise man and a fool. I've thought more than once, either I'm insane or everybody else is. So here you go, you have Diogenes. Here's some stories about Diogenes. How accurate they are, who knows, it's a long time ago. But he would mock people. He was watching somebody with a bow and arrow, an archer trying to hit its target. He kept missing. Diogenes sat right next to the target saying, "This is the safest place." He saw a prostitute's son getting angry at a crowd, throwing rocks. He said, "Careful, son, don't hit your father." Obviously, I'm not saying everything Diogenes says is kind or good. He was a different sort of guy. He carried around this lamp in the daytime, and he would walk right up to people, like get in uncomfortably close to them, with this lamp lit with a candle in it in the middle of the daytime, and we would get to him. He said, "I'm just looking for an honest man." And then he'd say, "Well, it's not you," and then he'd keep going. Just enough to get people inwardly to think, what does he mean I'm not honest? Now, being not honest doesn't mean not lying. He's talking about being honest to yourself in terms of your behaviors, in terms of your need for popularity, things such as that. Diogenes, he has the most, who is most content with the least. Concept that you hear with Socrates as well. They both looked at life on earth as being a brief period of time, and the things we should most collect or build upon were our virtues, not our possessions. I have found the more money you get, the more money you need. I don't think many people will ever say that this amount of money I'll be happy with, because we'll find a way to need a little bit more. If we all could be content with little, then we would lack little, and we'd probably be more content. Once Diogenes saw the officials in a temple leading away someone who had stolen a bowl belonging to the treasurers, the taxmen, and he said, "Look, the great thieves are leading away the little thief," outwardly down, talking bad of the governments. In a rich man's house, there's no place to spit but his face. This story is pretty ridiculous, but he was bothered by people who would have these crazy houses with the big curtains on the wall and like 43 forks on the table, all of their materialism. And the story goes, he was in a rich man's house, and he spit right into the rich guy's face, and then he took his dirty cloth that he had wearing over him, and he wiped off the guy's face, and he apologized, saying it was the only dirty place in the room to spit. Meaning everywhere else in the house was so immaculate, only the face of the dirty, materialistic guy. Well, you know what? You got invited to a dinner party. Spitting in his face is a Diogenes thing to do, I guess. Diogenes did not give a crap. He gave none, as it were. It's better to walk alone than with a crowd going in the wrong direction. The key word there is wrong. I mean, if everybody's leaving because there's a natural disaster, this one dude going the opposite direction might not be making a good choice. But cynics would go out of their way to walk against the flow of a crowd leaving a theater. They'd walk backwards in the streets. They were trying to show that they were going to go against the current of life. They were going to go opposite of the majority. The question is, being opposite of everybody, is that just being a pain in the ass? Or is walking against the flow, if you will, of the current of life and questioning things that everybody accepts are normal, is that something that should happen? I mean, it's fair to say that at one point in a part of this country, it was acceptable that a man could own another man via indentured servitude and then slavery. And obviously today, I would hope that's not a belief that anybody has. There had to be people who went against the crowd in order to actualize those changes. Not saying that cynics were trying to actualize that sort of change. They were trying to get people to come to terms with what was truly important. Their virtue, not their material possessions and their reputation. Plato, who was alive the same time of Diogenes, was, unfortunately for him, one of Diogenes' favorite targets. Diogenes knew Socrates just like Plato did, and he thought that Plato had sort of biffed and misinterpreted most of what Socrates had said. So Plato, while he was giving a speech, Diogenes would sometimes come in. He would eat in the theater. He would heckle him. There's rumor that he may have taken part in a bodily function within the theater. The most famous example is somebody had questioned Plato about what is man, and he said that man is a featherless biped. Biped meaning 2 feet. We don't have feathers, most of us anyway. And Diogenes then showed up with a chicken and said, "I brought you a man." Now obviously that's not exactly what Plato meant, but Diogenes took it as his life work to mess with Plato and all others of those who he disapproved of. One day, other stories of him, one day Diogenes yelled out for men to come quick, and all the men showed up, and then he had his stick, and then he swung at them, and he said, "It was men I called for, not for scoundrels," basically saying that men, these weren't not men, these were people who were not of strong moral caliber. He was asked his favorite beverage. He said, "What I like to drink most is wine that belongs to others." The famous story is he saw that he had one bowl that he had as a possession. Sometimes you see him carrying the bowl he'd use for drinking. And then and he would literally leave it on his head a lot of the time. And he saw a peasant boy just take water with his hands. And he took, apparently, Diogenes did, he said, "Fool, I've been carrying around this extra baggage all of the time." And the story goes he broke the bowl. Whether that's true or not, who knows? Classic example, he was outside of a feast and all of the people were making fun of him, calling him an animal, calling him a dog, and they started throwing bones at him. So he acted like a dog and he raised his leg and he urinated on them. Diogenes of Sinope, most students' favorite philosopher. "I pissed on the man who called me a dog. Why was he so surprised?" said Diogenes. That is not Diogenes. Diogenes did not have that much clothing. So what does cynic mean? The term cynic actually comes from the Greek word that means dog-like. As Diogenes said, "I'm called a dog because I fawn on, or I'm nice to, those who give me anything. I yelp or bark at those who refuse, and I bite. I set my teeth into rascals." In other words, if you've ever seen, I don't know, this might be wrong for some of you, but some people, dogs, animals, babies, kids, they just like you. Others, dogs don't like. Dogs maybe have a sense. And the idea is, Diogenes was pretty simple. If you're nice to him, he's nice to you, and he's loyal, like a dog. If you've done him wrong, he will bare his teeth, like a dog. So what does a cynic mean? If you jump down to that second paragraph, someone who believes that human conduct is motivated wholly by self-interest, meaning that the way we act, we just do it selfishly. And I'd say about 100% of us would agree that most of the things we do is because we think, how is this good for me? Cynical is somebody who realizes this is the face. Oscar the Grouch was a cynic. So going back to the dogs, dogs apparently love Diogenes. As I said, cynic means dog. He said we should live more like a dog. He said if we look at the way we live, we're hypocrites. We live in this artificial, fake way. He said we should live more like a dog. He said if you look at the dogs themselves, they will eat anything. They're not fussy. That's convenient. They make no big deal about where they sleep. They just lie themselves down and they sleep. They don't need a big old bed and house. They do their naturally bodily functions in public without embarrassment. I guess he's calling for, public urination and the rest, but we do get a little undue embarrassed about things like our bodies, which must be covered up at all times. We were not born with turtlenecks. Number 4, to know instinctively who is friend and who is enemy. Dogs and babies tend to know that. I apologize if every time a baby or a dog sees you, they bark or cry or bark, as it were. Dogs live in the present without anxiety. I don't know if that's true. Dogs can flip out on fireworks and thunderstorms and if you leave the house because they don't understand time. But they definitely live more in the present. We, as humans, are so smart, we can create a make-believe world in our mind to cause us lots of pain and suffering of thoughts that are not even real or based upon past and future scenarios that will never exist. And therefore, Diogenes felt that the dog was superior to humans. I found this image, I just found it quite hysterical and relatively accurate. So you got Socrates, he's the old guy, and his teachings influenced Plato, and then Plato influenced Aristotle. Aristotle became the teacher of the famous Alexander the Great, who will become a major player in the story. Then you have Diogenes, who's basically just a Molotov cocktail. So you have a series of philosophers leading to the great Alexander the Great, and then you have Diogenes. This is the famous statue of when the two men met. Alexander the Great had heard about Diogenes, this quote-unquote philosopher living in the streets of Athens. Diogenes was in the streets of Athens. Alexander the Great comes up to him, and he sees that Alexander is going through a pile of garbage. And Diogenes does not look up. And Alexander wonders why he does not look up. And Diogenes says, I am searching for the bones of your father, but I cannot tell them apart from those of a slave. Literally calling out Alexander's father and Alexander as not being royal or special. These are the first words that the beggar Diogenes had for the most powerful man on the planet at the time, Alexander the Great. Alexander was above him, and Alexander said to him, well, Diogenes, is there anything I can do for you? Because Diogenes was playing with the garbage. And Diogenes told Alexander the Great, yes, get out of the way of the sunshine. As Alexander the Great was walking away, he said to one of his many followers, reportedly, if I were not Alexander the Great, I would wish to be Diogenes. Diogenes reportedly said, if I were not Diogenes, I would also wish to be Diogenes. Now, what does this mean? Why, hypothetically, does this super powerful Alexander the Great, why does he wish to be like a beggar? This is a good discussion topic. Plato once said to Diogenes, if you had paid your respects to the king, you would not be washing lettuce today, meaning having to wash your food before you eat it. To which, with equal calmness, Diogenes said, if you would wash lettuces, Plato, you would not have to pay your respects to the king. Meaning, if you'd be willing to accept less, you wouldn't have to kiss ass. Diogenes really looked at no man as being superior to him. He looked at them in a simplistic, dog-like way. Reasons why Diogenes is the best philosophers. Cup suck. I am Alexander the Great. You're Alexander the... You are my hero, Diogenes. Shut up. So the quote once again, Alexander the Great, he said, I am searching for the bones of your father, but cannot distinguish them. What does this mean? Do we really treat all others as equal? Or if you can get something from somebody, if somebody's popular, or somebody's good looking, or somebody has some key that you need, do we treat them the same? What makes the bones of a king any different from those of a beggar? Now, we look at some people who are successful and have money differently, but are they truly different? How many of them are taking their riches with them? Diogenes tried to show that this fake, insincere behavior has caused all of this, we don't treat people the same. We treat people differently. Like, for me as a teacher, I try to talk to the students the same way I talk to the adults as humans. And I don't think of it, well, that's a 13-year-old autistic boy, or that's an 18-year-old, Caucasian boy. I don't label anything. I look at everybody as being the same. When I spoke about this in class last year, and we talked about if you're a waiter or a waitress, do you treat some people better in terms of service based on your tips? And you can understand what their answers were. Man is the most intelligent of the animals and the most silly. We are kind of goofy if you think about, just the way we live life, and you're well dressed if you have a piece of cloth tied around your neck in some sort of tie-like fashion. Now, what specifically did Diogenes think made people so silly? This would be the discussion point. So, if we had to summarize his teachings, he thought that social climbing and lying to yourself about what's important, about being popular, I'm sure all of you at some point, unfortunately, have either left a social group or were left from a social group. You weren't cool enough or you were too cool. Most everybody, unfortunately, at some point deals with that from one side or the other. Diogenes thought that a lot of things, the way we live society, it's impossible to be happy. I mean, the existence for a teenage girl of having to look at all of the supermodels who've been airbrushed, that's artificial. They don't even look like that. How can a teenage girl find solace and peace of mind in a society where this occurs? He said that we should go back to... A lot of his views can be seen in the views of people like Henry David Thoreau, who was disgusted with society and left, went to Walden. If man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it's because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music he hears, however measured or far away. The idea of everybody hearing a different drummer means people have the capacity to act differently, but unfortunately our society is so based upon popularity and acceptance that we tend to shape ourselves into what we think others want from us. People like Diogenes and Thoreau and Socrates spoke out against this tendency. Others' teachings of Diogenes: why do we care so much what society thinks of us? Can we go against the masses in the need to conform? Is there anything wrong with conforming? Why not just go along with the flow? Do what everybody else does. What's the problem with that? Those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. We'll talk about Nietzsche later in the year, but these topics are all good for discussion in journals. Do we know for certain that society is doing the right dance? In other words, if you go opposite society, you're thought an outcast. But how many times, at some point, George Washington died because he had strep throat, and they bled him of half of his blood and put some sort of motor oil-like sap thing down his throat to cure him. Well, maybe during that time, if you were someone who thought maybe bleeding of blood and leeches is not the way, you'd be going against medical advice. That just shows that times can change and so can views, and to simply accept what has been said before might not be the most prudent move. It's not that I am mad, it's only that my head is different than yours. It's the ability to accept that others, maybe have different views. As I say often, would you rather be right or would you rather be free? Trying to argue other people that your view is correct is really only about your ego. Much better to just be free to let people believe whatever they want to believe. Nobody offends us but we ourselves. A lot of kids have a problem with this, but ultimately, you can say what you want to me. If I hold you in esteem, meaning I value your opinion, and what you say is negative, it might offend me, it might hurt me. But if I don't hold you in that much esteem, I'm not going to care as much what you have to say. At some point, if you know what you're doing is right or your views are correct, maybe you don't have to be offended. Only you, as Marcus Aurelius said, only you can truly allow yourself to be harmed by another's words. It's kind of the sticks or stones, but slightly more philosophical. Diogenes himself, he died in 323. He said, when I die, take my body, throw them over the wall so the animals could eat him. Here you see a statue of him. In the base of the statue, you see him in his wine barrel, literally kind of kicking it with his lamp and his dog. And they put this statue in his honor. The foundation of every state is the education of its youth. I could not agree more than that. And I think questioning what we do as a society is good to do. Make sure you write journals.